not right.
There we go.
So good evening. Welcome, everybody. I'm Rebecca Epley, and I'm an adult services librarian at the Diamond Branch. And welcome to our Mystery Writers of America panel. We've all been on Zoom for a while, but I just wanted to go over a few things before we start. So you're all on mute right now, and we'll leave you on mute during the panel discussion. And then we will unmute you for the question and answer period. Sarah Hodgson, who's the branch manager of Diamond Branch, she's also here. So she'll be managing the chat. If you need help with anything or have any questions, you can just email Sarah privately. This program is being recorded, so just want to make everybody aware of that. And later on in the program, I'll add a link to Marcus Bookstore with links to all of the panelists, where you can buy their books. And I think that is it for the housekeeping. And then I'm really excited about our panelists tonight. We're joined by Bryan Patrick Avery, Reece Hirsch, Nava, Lisa Towles, and our panel will be moderated by Glenda Carroll. So I will just introduce Glenda. I'm going to give you a little overview of Glenda, and then I'll turn it over to Glenda. So if you want to find Glenda Carroll, she'll be in, on, or underwater and writing about it. She understands water sports on a very personal level since she swims, surfs, and sails. Glenda was a longtime sports columnist for the Marin Independent Journal, focusing on sailboat racing. She also wrote for local, national, and international sailing publications, and then branched into travel writing. She is the author of the Tricia Carson mysteries, which are set in the San Francisco Bay Area, including Marin, the East Bay State Parks, and of course, San Francisco. Her books have a swimming undercurrent based on her own experience. She has raced in more than 150 open water swims in Northern California, as well as Hawaii and Perth, Australia. Her third book in the series, Dead Code, was published last month. So welcome, Glenda. I'll turn it over.
Thank you. I wasn't expecting that, but thank you very much. Well, I'm delighted to be here to kind of moderate this panel. We've got a group of wonderful local writers that I know that you're going to enjoy listening to, and you have a chance to ask questions at the end. But while we're going through it, if you can just hold your questions till we finish. But hopefully I've come up with some interesting things that you might want to know about each person who's on the panel. And I'll give you a rundown of what we're going to do. First, I'm going to introduce the writers, and then I'm going to start with a general question that they're all going to answer. So basically the same question. And then I'll go from writer to writer and ask them something that's unique to them and to their works. So I'm going to start with Bryan Patrick Avery. At the age of 7, Bryan discovered a love for reading and mysteries after receiving his first Bobbsey Twin mystery book. Who remembers the Bobbsey twins? I do. Today, he is an award-winning poet and author of books for children. His middle grade story, The Magic Day Mystery, appears in Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries, an anthology from HarperCollins and the Mystery Writers of America. His debut picture book, The Freeman Field Photograph, illustrated by Jerome White, was published by Clear Fork Publishing Spork. His early reader series, Mr. Grizzly's Class, illustrated by Arif Putra, is available now from Picture Window Press. Bryan serves on the board of directors of the Northern California chapter of Mystery Writers of America and is a 2021 Amplify Black Stories Fellow, a joint program presented by the Brown Bookshelf and the Highlights Foundation. Bryan lives in Northern California with his family. And one thing I know about Bryan is writing is not his full-time job, right, Bryan?
That's true.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. I asked all of the writers to tell me something about themselves that people don't know. And there were many interesting things, but Bryan takes the cake. So let me see, I'll make sure I would get this right. And I'm going to ask him to help me with this. So everybody knows, you've heard of Sir Paul McCartney. You've heard of Sir Elton John. Bryan's a sir. He was knighted in 2016. He is the Knight Commander of Grace in the Sovereign Order of St. John of Jerusalem. And tell me the last, is it Hospitalier? The last one?
Hospitaller or hospitaller, it depends on who you talk to and which side of the ocean they live on.
Okay, because I have no idea what that is. Yeah, so, and this is an organization that dates back to the days of chivalry, am I right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, back to the Crusades.
The Crusade, okie dokie. We'll go to Reece. Reece Hirsch, number one, has a dynamite website, so go take a look at it. Is the Thriller Award nominated author of 6 thrillers that draw upon his background as a privacy attorney. His latest is Dark Tomorrow, the second book in a series featuring FBI cybercrime investigator Lisa Chanchik. Reece is a partner in the San Francisco office of an international law firm and co-head of its privacy cybersecurity practice. He is also a member of the directors of the Valentino Achek Beng Foundation. And this is a foundation to empower youth, children, and women, and with educational opportunities. And this is in South Sudan, if I'm correct.
That's right.
Got it right? Okay, good. Because I checked it out. It sounded really interesting to me.
It's a great
Okay.
organization.
Yeah, okay. Something that Reece has said that nobody knows about, or very few people know about. Let me get back that sheet of paper. Okay, before law school, he was the founder, editor, and publisher of an arts and entertainment magazine in Atlanta. And he actually interviewed Ray Bradbury, which is something I'd like to hear more about too. Okay. Okie dokie. All right, we're coming to you, Michael. I got to find the right piece of paper. Okay, next is Michael Nava. Michael Nava is the author of an acclaimed series of 8 novels featuring gay Latino criminal defense lawyer Henry Rios, who the New Yorker called a detective unlike any previous protagonist in American noir. He is a recipient of 7 Lambda Literary Awards in the gay mystery category and the Bill Whitehead Award for Lifetime Achievement in LGBT literature. His most recent Rios novel, Lies with Man, was published in April by Amble Press, an LGBTQ press of which he is also the managing editor. The Washington Post review of the novel called Nava, a master of the genre. And the thing that he said that most people didn't know about him was that he was 40 before he had a pet. Now, I can't let that go. I want to know what kind of pets you have and the name.
Black cats.
Cats?
Black
Oh.
cats.
Oh, okay. Black cat. Okay. All right. And Lisa Towles, who actually put this presentation together today, so we have her to thank for getting all these writers together. She has 6 mystery thrillers in print, and 95, a new techno crime thriller, will be released this month in November by Indies United. Her 2019 thriller, The Unseen, was a finalist in the thriller category of the Best Book Awards by American Book Fest, and her 2017 thriller, Choke, won a 2017 IPPY and a 2018 New York City Big Book Award, for thriller. Lisa's published books include The Unseen, Choke, and the following titles published under her previous name, Lisa Polizzar: The Ghost of Mary Prairie, Escape, Blackwater Tango, and Knee Deep. She is an active member and frequent panelist speaker of Mystery Writers of America, Sisters in Crime, and International Thriller Writers. She has an MBA in IT management and works full-time in the tech industry in the San Francisco Bay Area. Lisa is also a passionate graphic designer and video creator. One thing you may not know about Lisa is that she is a classically trained flutist, and at one point made her living by doing recordings as a flutist and performing in venues. So we have a real interesting group of people, all very different. you heard my bio.
Can I add something, Glenda? I also have a black cat.
I have a black cat. I have a black dog. That's about it. Yeah, that's great. Okay. The only thing I can add to what Rebecca read about me, for something that you might not know, going along with my water sports theme from my whole life, is I once was a navigator on a 36-foot sailboat from here to Hawaii. I wasn't supposed to be, but I'm so glad I took the class. So I learned how to use a sextant and got us where we needed to go, or we would have been in Japan, I guess. The person who was supposed to do it got very, very seasick and said, "You're it." So that was me. So what I want to do is ask everyone just sort of a general question, and we'll just go around and see what you think. All right, so thinking about your latest book, what was the most challenging part when you were writing it? What was the most exciting part of the writing? And if you think again on the challenging part, what did you do to overcome that? So Michael, let's start with you.
So it's basically the same answer for both sides of the question. My book is set in Los Angeles in 1986 when the AIDS epidemic was rampaging through the gay community. And that year, a group of reactionaries put a ballot initiative on the California ballot that would have allowed local health officials to quarantine people who tested HIV positive into what were essentially concentration camps. So the most difficult thing was going back and reliving that era. And the most gratifying part was writing about that era because, my generation of gay men is passing into history. And I thought it was important to document what happened from the perspective of someone who was there when it was happening.
When you were writing this, it sounds like you were reliving some things that were extremely difficult to relive. So how did you get through that to continue writing it?
Well, we're all professionals, and I have a certain amount of detachment from it at this point. It's 40 years ago now. So yeah, I just practiced detachment, and I revised considerably.
Okay, all right. Reece, how about you? Same question. Challenging, what did you do? And the exciting parts about your last book.
Well, the challenge was that with this book, unlike some of my previous ones, I wasn't pulling directly from things that I've learned as a privacy and cybersecurity attorney, because it was dealing with the world of cyber warfare, which obviously I'm not privy to. And actually, no one outside the intelligence community really knows very much about it. But I had to read everything that was available about the workings of Cybercom or Cyber Command, which is the US agency that defends our country against cyber threats.
Oh, okay.
And so I was able to sort of piece together a picture of what that world looks like, because my character, Lisa Tanchik, an FBI agent, starts out investigating a murder that turns out to be part of a larger attack on the US, and she gets pulled into the world of Cyber Command. And so that was the challenging part, was to piece that together and to figure out what it's like inside there. And some of it involved a little extrapolation, but that was also the exciting part too, because I learned a lot about the threat of cyber warfare, and frankly, it was really terrifying. It's something that happens every day between nations. It just hasn't flared up into a full-scale war or cyber war. And I think it's just absolutely inevitable that it's going to happen. And actually, when I was sort of imagining what a massive Russian cyber attack on the US would look like, it turns out that one was already underway at that time, the solar winds hack, which affected so many government agencies and corporations. So that's the challenge, but it was also the exciting part of writing this book.
Interesting. Bryan, what about you?
So my next two books that come out in January, Soccer Suspicions and Off Base, are actually part of the Jake Maddox JV Mysteries series. So I got to write them as someone else, but that was a bit of a challenge because there are a ton of Jake Maddox books. And so I had to read them all and kind of understand the style of the book and all of that so that when readers pick these books up, they kind of understand. So I spent a lot of time reading some of the previous Jake Maddox books and getting a feel for how the stories are told. So that was a bit challenging because it was a little different than the way I would typically tell a story. The fun part for me was I love sports and I love mysteries, and so I got to do both of them. I grew up in the Bay Area. I was a young kid in the early 80s when Rickey Henderson was playing for the Oakland A's and was working to break the single season stolen base record. And so Off Base is actually about a middle school kid who is trying to break his school's all-time stolen base record. So I got to relive a lot of that. And so it was fun for me. I always tell people, one of the first pieces of advice I got as a writer is write what you know. And I always tell people now, write what you enjoy, because it's so much fun and you have to spend so much time with your work and you have to read it so much and work through it so much that if it's something you enjoy, it makes it a lot easier. And so I really enjoyed getting to do that, and it was a lot of fun and really exciting for me to kind of go back and relive a lot of that from my childhood, and then also be able to put it into a book.
Okay, good. Okay. Lisa, what about you?
Such interesting answers. I have kind of the same answer that Reece had. It's the same challenge was the excitement, and that was all the research that I did for my latest book, 95. So it's kind of described as a techno thriller, and it's a very techie book that has a lot of math. It's also about cryptocurrencies, the dark web, cryptography and code breaking. I actually made up a code in this book, and that was so fun. Interestingly enough, it's called a Reece cipher, not named after Reece Hirsch, but it's named after a fictitious naval captain that made up this cipher that kind of takes a message and sort of rolls it through the periodic table and turns it into numbers. It was kind of interesting. And so the research was really fun, but it was hard and it takes time, and it's a really fast-paced book. So I had to write it really kind of all in one cycle. For something like that, that's going to be very fast paced for the reader, I had to really write it that way too, just to make sure I didn't, lose any momentum. So it was challenging, but it was a lot of fun too.
Interesting. Okay, so we're going to go into sort of the individual ones, and I'm going to start with Reece. And I'm really curious about your protagonist, Lisa Tanchik. I read an interview that was on your website, and you called her really badass. And I wondered what you did in writing to make her badass, but also to make her real, not a superhero. What are some of the things that you added to her that made her, that someone could relate to?
Well, when I was developing this character, I imagined that it might be a little challenging for someone who has the sort of cyber security background that she has, within the FBI and the sort of macho, gun-toting culture of the FBI. And I thought that would present challenges for someone like her who really maybe doesn't have the same kind of physical tools for subduing a perp or, handling firearms. And I learned by talking to some people in the FBI that is a real dynamic. And as the FBI has tried to adapt to deal with cybercrime, they do still sort of have a prejudice against the geeks, who are handling cybercrime issues. And so she had that going against her. And so she's a badass at the keyboard, but not always such a badass when it comes to sort of the physical challenges of being an FBI agent, but she makes up for it. And she has to kind of prove herself. And that was part of the interesting, part of the series, because particularly in the first book, Black Nowhere, she has to prove that she's the right person to bring down this dark web kingpin, and that it's really a job for someone with her cyber credentials rather than a traditional, agent who would try to bring down a drug cartel, which is basically what it was.
Interesting. Okay. Michael, I know reviewers have said that your new book, Lies with a Man, is probably one of your best, or if not the best, Henry Rios novel so far. And Rios is a criminal defense lawyer, and has gone through a lot. He lost his partner in the burning plan, and he had a heart attack in Rag and Bone. Now, I'm curious, do these experiences happen through your whole series of books? And there's 7, am I correct? Or am I right?
Oh, no, I think there are 8.
8, okay, all right, so you've got 8-book series. So 2 questions. 1, how does your main character, Rios, change through this series? Maybe there's more than 2 questions. Does his idea about justice change? And this has nothing to do with the other one, but did you know you were writing a series when you started?
So I'll start with the last one first, because that's an interesting question. No, I didn't mean to write a series. I didn't mean to become a mystery writer. I've written since I was 12 years old, but until I was in my 20s, I wrote and studied poetry, and I was going to be a poet. And I published some poetry when I was, in my early 20s. And then I went to a law school, and the poetry just dried up. It was like the muse said, "You're going to law school, I'm out of here." But the desire to write never left me. I mean, I think like all the rest of you, I'm a born writer. So I switched to fiction, but I didn't want to write that sort of melodramatic first semi-autobiographical novel that all young first novelists write. Like, at this point, I'm 23, maybe. So I thought, I like mysteries, and I didn't know they were considered crap literature because I'd been introduced to them by my mentor, a Yates scholar at the college I went to, and anything she liked, I figured had to be good literature. So I thought, I'll write a mystery because then I'll have to learn how to plot. I'll have to learn dialogue. I will teach myself fiction by writing this mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wrote the first one off and on for 4 years. I graduated from law school. I went to LA. I joined the prosecutor's office. And I got into this private writing workshop. And the man who was running it, Paul Gillette, he said, "You should try to get this published." That really, it was kind of a learning exercise and a lark. So I sent it off to like a dozen New York publishing houses. They all rejected it. The reason they rejected that was because the protagonist was gay. This was 1985. And they said, "There's no audience for this kind of book." They said, "The writing's great, but there's no audience for it." So I finally found this tiny gay publisher, Allison Publications, and they said, "Oh, we'd love to publish this." And my advance was $600. And so they published it in paperback, or trade paper, and it was reviewed in the New York Times. In the Newgate Calendars column, and that came as a surprise to all of us. So then my publisher, Sasha Allison, said, "Well, do you have another one in you?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" And so I wrote the second one, which he also published, which was also well received. And an agent from New York called me and said, if you keep writing these, I can get you a deal with one of the big publishers. That's how, and I said, okay. So he got me a 2-book deal with Harper and Row, now HarperCollins. And that's how I became a mystery writer.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, then I'm going to save the other two questions
Yeah.
for later, because that was a question I was going to ask you as we went through this circle, is how receptive, for your first book, did you find the publishing world? You answered, so that's great. So Bryan, I know I've talked with a bunch of you before, and you started out also as a poet, and you started out writing mysteries for adults. And how did you switch over to kids, and why?
Well, the why is I had a child, and sort of like poetry dried up for Michael when he went to law school. Having a child dries up a lot of violence and murder and all of that for you, and so I spent the early years of her life reading a lot of Dr. Seuss and princess stories and stories about fairies and unicorns, and I still loved storytelling. But I wanted to be able to tell stories that I could share with my daughter. And so I hemmed and hawed a lot for actually quite a while, about 10 years. She was 10 really before I finally said, you know what, I'm gonna give writing for kids a try. And I joined the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, which, if you want to write for kids, I mean, they're really the premier group of children's book writers. And I joined them just on the advice of a friend who had heard about them at a writing conference she was at, and really kind of haven't looked back. Writing for kids is obviously, it's very different. One of the things, so when I read my story from Super Puzzle-tastic Mysteries, I always read a section right at the beginning where the two friends, Marlon Jackson, who's the sleuth, and his friend Jose, talk about the crime. Because one of the things that I found very different in writing mysteries for kids is obviously there's a lot less violence. You still have the occasional murder, or at least the occasional body in some middle grade books. And all bets are kind of off when you get to YA, but certainly with chapter books in middle grade, the violence is really scaled down. And so you don't really have those moments that you have in a lot of mystery novels where they stand around a crime scene or somebody discovers a body or different things like that. The introduction of the crime is a lot more subtle. And so that was something that I had to kind of adjust to and figure out, okay, in middle grade books, and particularly in chapter books, usually the crime is, something's missing or somebody's sabotaging something or something like that. And so that subtlety of how do you determine something's missing? How do you talk about it, describe what it is, and then figure out, what does a crime scene like that look for? And so it's a challenge, but it's also a lot of fun to come up with creative ways to do that. I used to find really creative ways to kill people off. Now I have to find really creative ways for things to disappear.
Okay. Lisa, to you, how did you happen on the topic of 95? How did you bring together a college student in the dark web?
It's a great question, and it's a very straightforward question, and I really have no idea. I hate when people say, where did you get the idea for this book or this book? And I don't know where my ideas come from. They just arrive. I mean, I guess for my next book that's coming out next June, the idea for that book came because my husband, Lee, gives me character names. And he gave me the name of Derek Abernathy. And I was like, oh, I really like that name. Write that down, put it in my file. And he put it in my file, and it stayed on top of this like file folder visibly out in my office for like a year and a half. And I finally started writing that book, and I wrote a 3-book series just based on that name. So I do really well with names, but for this book, 95, the main character is Zach Skinner. The first book I ever wrote, I was 20. It was pretty terrible, but Zach Skinner was like the only good thing about that book. I liked his name, and so I revivified him in this current book, and I just kind of took off on this kind of Matrix-ish wild goose chase. So I don't know like where like the exact point of origin was. I don't know. And it's kind of a wild ride.
Okay, all right, okay. So back to Reece. Has Lisa changed in the series that you've been writing?
Yeah, I'm just 2 books in, but I think she's gained a lot of confidence because, as I was saying in the first book, she sort of proved herself within the FBI. So in the second book, we see her as kind of a much more established figure, sort of leading a team, you know, not having to prove herself. But throughout the entire series, she does grapple with depression. And that's something I wanted to explore a little bit with these books. I guess the classic trope is to have the alcoholic noir character. And I thought that had been done a great deal, but I haven't seen as many, portrayals of depression in genre fiction that I felt, sort of rang true. So I wanted to explore that. Somebody who is, highly functional, but also dealt with ongoing challenges in that regard.
Okay. Michael, we'll go back to basically the same question. Has your character, your main character, protagonist, Rios, has he changed over the series of 8 books? And how?
Well, to Reese's point, he starts out as a classic soaked alcoholic noir hero, but then he gets sober.
Nothing wrong with that.
No, that's totally. But then he gets sober. He gets sober, so part of the series is about his struggle to get and stay sober. So that's one thing that changes. And I think I don't know. He's a strange character because on the one hand he's gay, he's Latino, so sort of these social outsider identities, these marginal identities. On the other hand, he's a great of the legal profession, so he's also sort of, and he knows judges and important politicians. So he's also on the inside. So he's the outsider's insider, and I've spent a lot of time exploring his ambivalent relationship toward being that character. How do you? I mean, he's fueled by his rage at injustice. At the same time, he recognizes the very real limitations of his profession in obtaining justice, and that all the justice he can obtain for his clients, it's contingent, it's never ultimate justice. So he deals with these ambiguities of identity and the limitations of what he can do as a lawyer.
There's 2 or 3 of you that are lawyers. Reece?
Lisa, are you a lawyer?
Michael, you were, right?
I'm not.
No,
You're not?
I retired a few years ago. Yeah.
You retired? And Bryan, you're in IT, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and so is Lisa.
Mhm.
That's pretty interesting. So we've got 2
Two
lawyers,
two
retired,
IT.
2 people in IT. Yeah.
Well, Lisa and Reese are the future of mystery writing.
Yeah, that's great. Bryan, I heard you speak once and you talked about what you can do for different age groups, how they're different. And I think you said there's like 4 different categories, basically, of kids, from the picture books up to the YA. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I write across the first 3 groups. I've stayed away from YA, but certainly with picture books, you have kids that are sitting in their parents' lap being read to. They also read some picture books themselves. I actually spent the morning this morning with a group of 3rd graders in Alameda, virtually, of course, but they had read my picture book, The Freeman Field Photograph, and so I spent time answering their questions about it and so forth. The next group are really chapter books, and so these are books that are anywhere from 500 words up to 6,000 to 10,000 words, and these are typically kids who are reading on their own, but usually in that sort of third grade, third, maybe fourth sometimes age range. And then middle grade, which is everything from sort of third up to sixth or seventh grade. And then YA, so when you get to kind of those teenage years, the books with high schoolers in them, they have YA. And then kind of a new sort of unusual category that everybody's still trying to figure out what they're calling new adult, which I think are for people who really enjoy YA, but realize, hey, I want to read about somebody who's not in high school. And so these tend to be sort of younger, college age stories, those kinds of things. And so, like I was saying before, when you get into those younger areas, the violence and all of that doesn't really fit well. And so you have to take that into account when you're writing. Certainly with YA, I'm reading a lot of YA this year. And I can tell you there's a pretty steep ramp up in violence between YA books and middle grade.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, have you read I'm Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter?
I have.
Yeah, I tutor high school students in Marin County, and they're first gen low income.
Mhm.
And one of my students, a sophomore in high school, is reading that. And so I read what they read, and it's
Right.
really good. It's
Yeah.
really good. And very much more sophisticated than I thought it would be.
Yeah, I have to say, I mean, that's one of the really cool things about YA is it's not, I mean, it still sort of falls in that children's book category in a lot of people's minds, but they are very, very sophisticated, and people of all ages read and enjoy YA novels for just the reason you're saying is they're very multi-layered, they're very real. Because the target audience is high school kids who don't really suffer a lot of BS from people, and so if you're going to get them to read something, it's got to be real, it's got to feel authentic, and so they make for good reads, I'll have to say.
Okay. Lisa, I know what you've done in the past have been primarily standalone, and I think you may have mentioned this before. Are you thinking about going into a series?
I just finished a series. So it's the series with that I wrote with that the name of that character, Derek Abernathy. He's one of two private investigators. And the first book, it's called Hot House, that will be published next June. So that's the first series that I'd ever written. And the book that's coming out in 2 weeks, that's a standalone. I've always only written standalone thrillers. Why? Because I didn't know how to write a series, and I was trying to find instruction, and most of my writer friends write series, and I was looking to like find workshops on. I mean, now there are some. Back then there really weren't very many. And finally my wise husband said, all you read are series books. You figure out the formula and just try it. And I did. And I had a lot of beta readers and a lot of feedback and some professional editing, two or three rounds of professional edits. And yeah, I think I did a pretty good job of sort of the mythology, of creating a character with a set of problems, and then kind of completely complicating her life and taking her through other challenges. But I'd love to get feedback from one of you guys who have written a lot of series. Michael, you've written 8 books in the Henry Rios series. I'd love to have you read my book that's coming out next year and tell me what you think of it, and then let me kind of pick your brain and ask you questions about how I could improve it for next time, because I'm always learning from other writers. So yes,
I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you. I want to add something too. My book that's coming out 95 is a new adult thriller. So I wanted to address what Bryan shared about that. Young adult is a very prescriptive audience. New adult is like this kind of nebulous thing. And you're right. My character is he's a sophomore in college, a transfer student, it kind of works as a thriller, but it's really a new adult thriller. But new adult kind of sort of doesn't exist in the world. There are a lot of agents and publishers that say, you know, no, we're not really using that anymore. That was a fad in like the early 2000s or something. But I think it really is a thing in between the YA, you know, kind of the YA definition and then adult thrillers.
Hey, I just reread The Secret History by Donna Tartt. I guess if that came out today, I think you'd probably call that new adult.
Ah, interesting, very interesting. Reece, just back to you. What are the pitfalls of writing a character of the opposite sex?
Well, yeah, I
Your
waited.
Protagonist, yeah.
Yeah, I had 4 books under my belt before I tried it. And, you know, I think that people seem to, you know, because my name could be either gender, a lot of people did think I was a woman writing that character, which I was flattered that passed muster. But I think it's mainly just, you know, digging deeply into the psychology. You know, we're all human beings, and you know, writing a rich character, you know, it's going to work. But I did have to, you know, sort of put myself in a different frame of mind in certain cases. You know, thinking about little details like she notices, you know, another you know, woman who's working in cybercom, you know, has sort of little blobs of fingernail polish instead of fully, you know, done, you know, nails. And it's the kind of thing she would notice.
Did you have to change the dialogue in how your character spoke? And is it different than how you might have a male protagonist?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of, like with any new character you're writing, you sort of have some preconceived ideas about what that character is going to be, you know, some traits that you've penciled out. But, you know, like whether it's male or female, once you start writing the character, you hopefully reach a certain point where they start to kind of come to life a little bit and take on a character of their own. And sometimes it's not exactly what you had in mind going in, but once that character starts really speaking, you know, I think you're on the right track.
Okay. Michael, tell me a little bit about your new job with Amble Press. What do you do? And do you like it?
So Amble Press is an imprint of a slightly larger publisher called Bywater Books, which is a lesbian press, and they've been around for a dozen years. And the owners decided that they wanted to expand their roster of writers to include other LGBTQ writers. They're especially interested in publishing queer writers of color. And it just so happened that that's what, once I left the law, I was thinking about that myself, of starting a small press to publish LGBT writers and writers of color. But I don't really, that's like, to start a small company was beyond me. But they asked me, you know, if I wanted to become managing editor, and I said, yeah, that sounds great. So what I do is everything, basically. I read submissions, I pick the books we write, I edit them, and then I work with the writers on designing, you know, promotion and marketing. I don't have to do the production and distribution or the bookkeeping, which is great. That's handled by Bywater. And I'm very proud of the book. I've published 4 books, my own book. So 2 of my writers are Black gay men, and their books are fantastic. And the 4th writer is teaches creative writing at San Francisco State. I mean, there's, you know, because the big publishers aren't really publishing LGBTQ writers anymore, except in tiny tokenistic numbers. There's just a large mass of really accomplished writers who can't get published. And so I'm publishing them. One of my forthcoming books is called Folk Queen, F-A-U-X. And it's written by a straight white cis woman who was actually part of the big drag scene in San Francisco in the late 90s. And she was actually performed as a drag queen. And she won a drag queen beauty pageant. And it's a brilliant memoir that reflects upon gender's performance, about how women are basically in drag from the time they're little girls, about her own experiences with the drag community, and it's with a very strong feminist slant. So I'm very happy to be bringing these books to the public, but it means less time for my own writing, which is kind of the downside.
Yeah, that was going to be sort of the next question that, are you able to write because of this position?
Oh yeah, I do. I write very slowly though. I've written 8 books in 30 years, so I'm not winning any contests.
Yeah, that makes me feel good because it's taken me 10 years to write 3, It just goes on forever sometimes, it seems.
I wrote a historical novel that was published in 2015 that took me 15 years to write. So.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. Bryan, I was wondering, are there things, and maybe you mentioned part of this already, that are taboo? You wouldn't put something in one book for a certain group of kids, or that you might in the other. What is it that you cannot put in basically any of the books? Are there things like that, or do you have to be just selective?
I think there are always rules that you can break. If you think about like violence in middle grade books, most publishers will tell you you need to shy away from that. But the body count in the Harry Potter books, sort of, I guess, refutes that notion. So I don't know that there's anything that's completely taboo. I can tell you publishers are really skittish about anything where animals are harmed. They're particularly in the middle grade and chapter book space, anything related to violence against children, from adults in particular. I mean, it's one thing if, the neighborhood bully beats up a kid, but there are challenges with adults harming children. But again, you still see instances of that throughout books. And in a lot of cases, like if you look at like Stuart Gibbs' books, his protagonists at some point usually run afoul of some adult who's trying to kill Teddy Fitzroy, and so it's hard to say that there are many things that you can't do. A lot of it, I think, and I think it's true with publishing for adults, right, is you have to find the right publisher that is okay with the story you've written. But I do think, like I said, with animals and then violence against children, I think in the younger books, I think that's certainly taboo. Again, with YA, kind of all bets are off. But I think there's not a lot you can't get away with if you do it well and you find the right publisher.
Okay.
Glenda,
Lisa, go ahead.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
I'd like to ask you a question.
Okay.
And you have that beautiful book poster behind you for your book Dead Code. And I know that was just published on August 27th. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And we were talking about book series, and everyone here is a series author. You two are a successful series author, and Dead Code is the third book in your series. So could you share anything about how you got the idea for writing the Tricia Carson series? And also, I love the question that you asked earlier. Did you know that you were going to write a series, or was it accidental and you wrote a standalone and you just weren't done, and so you went on to book 2?
That's basically me. That's what I did. But Dead Code, let's see, when I started with, and I'll show you, I've got the other books here, all the covers are similar. So the first book I wrote was Dead in the Water. And you can see it's sort of similar to the Dead Code. And then the second book is Drop Dead Red. Okay, so I have a graphic artist, someone who's on my master swim team, and he's the one who's come up with these ideas, and they're great. I really enjoy it. I like his work. But for Dead Code, I never ever thought I was going to write fiction, ever. I was a newspaper writer. I was a sports writer, and I'd written for different magazines. And that's, some of the magazine writing is definitely non-fictional. but boy, I just never thought, in fact, there was somebody once asked me, don't you have a novel in there somewhere? And I just got really huffy. How can you write about something that's not true? And when I worked for Kaiser Permanente in communications for many years, and along with the, writing for the Marin IJ, writing about sailing. And I did all the things you do for PR. Newsletters. I did the website. I did all this writing. And then when I finally left, I had gotten a flyer from Book Passage that's here in Marin, and they have a lot of different writing clinics. And one was on mystery writing. And so I just went in to talk to them about it because I thought I might sign up because it might be interesting. And I said, I don't have anything written, but I've written in the past. And they said, well, some people just come and want to be around the authors. But she said, if you can come up with 20 pages, we can find someone to critique it for you. And that's all I needed. So I had by the time of the Mystery Writers Conference, I had 90 pages. So I just gave her the first 20. And it turned out that the woman who was critiquing it was someone I had done some writing for a magazine called Women's Sports. So she didn't remember me until I started talking about the things I'd done. Anyway, it was just going to be a standalone. I hadn't thought of a series at all. And I got through with it, and it was published, and people liked it. And a lot of things that happened to me, people's comments come to me through the women's locker room of the swim team that I'm on. And this one woman came up to me and she said, you better write another book because I want to know what's going to happen to Tricia. And I sort of went, well, okay, I'll write another book. And that's how it started. I mean, let's say I'm not particularly focused, or maybe I'm not ambitious. I don't know what it is, but that's how it got me started. I never thought I was going to write fiction. I certainly never thought I was going to write a series, but here I am really involved with these characters, and people want to know what's going to happen with them. So now I feel like I'm obligated to continue. So that's me.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Sure. So I think, Lisa, I was going to ask you a question. And do you have any favorite series writers? Because you're going to start one.
So many. There's literally not time enough to go through all of them. But I love the Michael Connelly Bosch series, but what I like even more than that is the Bosch and Ballard books. I love Renee Ballard, and I like Renee Ballard and Bosch together. There aren't that many of those books, but there's another one that's about to come out. I love those. And conversely, I also love Louise Penny, which have a very different kind of vibe to them to Bosch. Which are grittier. So yeah, there are so many that I like. How about you? Do you have a favorite series that you read?
Michael Connelly.
Michael Connelly.
Yeah. Yeah. I got to it through the Netflix series.
Oh, you started with TV and went to the book? Interesting.
Yeah, because the casting was perfect. I feel the writing was really crisp and the plots were fascinating. So after I watched the whole, there's six series or 6 episodes, or not 6. Yeah, I guess.
Seasons. 6
seasons. After I watched all of those, then I thought, I want to go read the books to see how accurate they are. How do they translate? And they're just, excellent. Just did a wonderful job. Yeah. Reece, you're the only one I don't think we've talked about in terms of series. Do you have a difference or a preference of standalone or series?
Well, I'm going to be writing a standalone next, but it's interesting with the current series, the last 2 books I wrote, it didn't really start out as a series, because with the first book, I was really, the impetus was the villain. It's sort of a fictionalized account of the rise and fall of the Silk Road dark web network. And so it's the only book I've written where I was basing the story on real characters and extrapolating on that. But I was just so fascinated by my villain in that book, this smart college kid who starts this dark web network, in his dorm room basically, and becomes this huge criminal kingpin, channeling a large portion of the U.S. illicit drug trade. And he starts out with these libertarian ideals, kind of like a lot of tech startup founders. And then he ends up ordering hits on people to protect his empire before before it's over. So I just really wanted to understand what would take a character from that point A to point B. And so because the publisher was interested in extending it in the series, I thought, well, this Lisa Tanchik character, she could go on. And I sort of developed her a little bit more to make her a worthy adversary to my villain. But I kind of started with the villain in that case.
Okay. Well, we've kind of gone through most of the questions that I had. And generally, we would ask if there were any questions from the audience at this time. And I don't know if there are. Anything at all, Rebecca?
I'm not seeing any questions.
Okay, all right, that's fine. Is there one thing I wanted to say, and this is going to go back to Lisa, since she's the one who really put this together. You mentioned there was some connection between 95 and Tommy Hilfiger. What's that all about?
Right. All right, so I guess there was something that kind of like launched this launched the journey for this crazy book. I was at a Tommy Hilfiger store. I like Tommy Hilfiger clothes, and there aren't really any around me, but my husband and I were at, I think it's like the Livermore Mall or something like that. And I went to a Tommy Hilfiger store. This was like a few years ago now. And let me take a step back. And as writers and as observers in life, I'm sure you guys will agree that sometimes something happens. You'll see something, you'll hear something, you'll overhear something, and something just clicks in your head. And you don't know why it's important, but it's just pinging some deep part of your creative soul. Something's happened. Two wires have touched, and you're impacted by that, and you don't know why, right? I'm sure we've all gone through that. I was buying just like, I don't know, some shirts or something like that. These two shirts, and I gave him my credit card, and the cashier said, "Receipt in the bag, okay?" Meaning, is it okay if I put the receipt in the bag as opposed to handing it to you? I mean, how many times have we heard that phrase? Like 100,000 in our lives, every time we buy something. And there was something about this woman saying, "Receipt in the bag, okay?" Something just clicked in my head, and I didn't know what it meant for a while. And I just knew that like something had clicked, and I wrote that phrase down, and I remembered it. And that was kind of the beginnings of the story. And the story is partly about an organization that embeds secret messages on store receipts. And Zach Skinner, the main character, is impressionable to these, and he finds himself receptive, and he finds out about it. And like any mystery, you're like, what's that? And you kind of tug on a little thread, and that pulls you deeper in, and you're like, wait, that goes over there, let me tug a little bit more. Next thing you know, you're like head first down this like matrix like rabbit hole, and you're like, where the heck am I? And not only is your life unrecognizable, but you don't know how to get back to your life, if you even can do that. And that's what happened to Zach in this book. He was investigating, what happened was he was investigating this scam, this kind of like series of crimes that were going on the campus of University of Chicago. And he started investigating that to try to find out what it was, find out who was behind it, what the motivation was behind it. Come to find out, that was just the tip of the iceberg to some deep, dark stuff that was also going on there related to the dark web and pharma and crypto, and it's kind of a wild story. So that's what happened. I bought 2 shirts at Tommy Hilfiger, and something was born in my head at that moment when the cashier said that.
Well, we are just about finished with our questions, and I'm going to open it up to our writers. If there's anything you want to ask each other or anything like that, happy to take it.
I had a question for Michael. I was going to ask, Michael, when you were working as a lawyer for your law career, were you a criminal defense attorney like Henry Rios, or what type of law were you practicing?
So, no, actually, out of law school, I was a prosecutor in Los Angeles for 4 years. And then I went to work for a small firm that did appellate work, and I became an appellate lawyer. And for most of my career, I worked as an attorney for judges in the California appellate court system. I was a staff attorney in the Court of Appeal in LA, and then I spent 15 years at the California Supreme Court as a staff attorney there and for some of the justices. And I would say that much of my practice as an appellate lawyer was in criminal law, which is how I kept my hand in it.
Okay.
I ended up working on death penalty appeals.
Oh my goodness.
Ah,
Wow.
interesting.
So I'm actually planning to write a standalone novel based on an appeal I handled my last 2 years at the court.
Interesting. Thank
Well, I
you.
think they say appellate lawyers are the best writers among lawyers. So.
That's all we do. Research and writing.
Any other
So-
questions that you might have to one another?
So Reece, you've scared me with this whole cyber war thing.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, that's my objective. I've made one more person scared of technology than my job.
So you really think there's going to be a cyber war?
Well, in fact, it's happening every day. It's just right now, it's sort of at the level of little pushes and shoves among countries. And there's been kind of this tacit understanding that no one is going to go too far. But there are examples of Russia basically engaging in cyber warfare against Ukraine. And in fact, a character in Dark Tomorrow is this Ukrainian cybersecurity consultant who's been sort of battling the Russians because basically they're able to try out their techniques on Ukraine because nobody is really sticking up for Ukraine. But then they take some of those techniques and they are now applying them against the United States. So I think it's just a matter of when someone goes over the line. For example, China and Russia have infiltrated our power grids. They just haven't turned off the power grid, but they have capabilities to do those things. And so my book is just, what if push came to shove and a country like Russia decided they wanted to turn off the power grid or interfere with a nuclear power plant, do all of those things that they are very much able to do. So it's pretty scary. There's a book, a lot of my research came from a book by David Sanger of the New York Times called The Perfect Weapon. And it's a very frightening book.
Do we have the same capabilities?
We do, but in some ways, we're at a disadvantage because we are very internet connected, which makes us vulnerable. But a country like Russia, relies on certain, outdated technology, which in a way makes them less vulnerable to these sorts of attacks. So the more you're connected to the internet, the more vulnerable you are. And so I think often they have to think about sort of what kind of escalation they're going to do because they have to be prepared for what comes next.
Wow, that's terrifying. Thanks.
One time.
You know, what I think we should probably do at this point is just go around once more. And why don't you, just for a minute for each of you, and just do a wrap up of where we can find your books. And we'll start with you, Michael. Where's the best place to find your books?
So probably online. If you don't want to use the Evil Empire, Jeff Bezos' Evil Empire, you can go to bookshop.org, which is a consortium of independent bookstores, or order it from your local bookstore.
Okay. Bryan?
So if you go to bryanpatrickavery.com, I've got purchase links for all of my books, and you can get it whether it's Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Bookshop. And so there's links to all of those places, and also links to buy them directly from the publishers.
Okay, good. Reece?
Since the publisher of my last 5 books was Thomas and Mercer, which is Amazon's mystery and thriller imprint, I'm very much enmeshed in Jeff Bezos's web, but you can find all my books on Amazon and other major outlets.
Okay, good. And Lisa?
Same for me. My book 95 will be coming out on November 24th, and it will be published in Kindle, paperback, hardcover, and audiobook. And the audiobook is actually available now. But the Kindle, paperback, and hardcover will be available in 2 weeks. And it's also available on Barnes & Noble and other retailers. It's going to be sold at Target and Walmart, I found out, which is
Wow,
interesting.
great.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's
That's
great.
great.
That's great.
Glenda,
Yeah.
how about you and your books?
Pretty much like everybody else. You can order it anywhere, you know, any bookstore you can walk in and order it. Certainly you can get it on Amazon. There's an ebook, paperback. I'm toying around now with having an audiobook done of it, but you know, you can go into Barnes and Noble and order it. Right now, it's not on the shelves anywhere. And I have friends who buy them directly from me. There are links certainly on my website. But yeah, that's where we are. So,
Can I add that all of my books are also available on Audible?
okay, cool, good, all right.
Excellent. Mine
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
right.
Mine
I
too.
just want to thank all of you. This has been really interesting for me, and I hope for you as well. And one thing I just wanted to say to thank Lisa, particularly, I mean, she's really supportive of other writers, new writers like me. Not that I'm that new, but you know, sometimes I have no idea what I'm doing. And she's been really helpful. So she's been great to be able to pull this together. And I'm so glad that we're all here tonight to talk about mysteries. And Rebecca, I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. This is really a great panel. So thank you all.
Okay.
Rebecca, can you tell us where the link to this session tonight will be published?
Oh,
So-
sure. Yes, it'll be on the library's website, so you
Okay.
can look for it there. Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Always a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to see you all. Hope
Yeah.
to see you soon
Thanks
in
again.
good person.
Take care.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.